At 3:47 in the morning on May 10, 1943, Captain Frederic Johnnie Walker stood on the bridge of the destroyer HMS Starling, observing the pitch-black North Atlantic. His flotilla of 6 ships had detected something impossible: 8 German U-boats navigating in a Wolfpack formation, just 40 miles off the Irish coast. It was a perfect trap. The Germans were hunting an Allied convoy of 42 merchant ships carrying vital supplies to England. But Walker wasn't worried. He smiled and picked up the radio microphone. "Gentlemen," he said calmly to the commanders of his flotilla, "it's time to introduce our baby to the wolves." The baby was something German naval engineers considered technically impossible: a weapon that could follow a submarine through evasive maneuvers, deep dives, and sudden changes in direction. It was something Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the Kriegsmarine, had declared to be pure British fiction. Over the next 6 hours, those 8 U-boats would vanish from German radio waves. No distress calls. No final transmissions. Only silence. And when the German Naval High Command tried to understand what had happened, the only possible explanation seemed so absurd it was initially dismissed as hysteria: the British had developed a depth charge that could think. The problem had begun in 1939. Conventional depth charges were brutally simple weapons: 200-kilogram barrels of explosives that sank to a preset depth and then detonated. A submarine had to be within 6 meters of the explosion to be destroyed. Anything beyond that, and the U-boat survived. The Germans knew this limitation perfectly. Their commanders were trained in a tactic called the evasive dive. The moment depth charges were launched, the U-boat would dive abruptly to 150 meters, turn 90 degrees, and accelerate. By 1941, the success rate of British depth charges was dismal, requiring an average of 250 bombs to sink a single U-boat. Most Allied ships were sunk before they could even launch that many. The U-boats were winning the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1942 alone, German submarines sank over 1,600 Allied ships, totaling more than 7.8 million tons. Winston Churchill later wrote in his memoirs that the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. He could never forget that everything happened just 20 feet below the surface of the sea. But in a locked room at the British Admiralty, a group of scientists led by Dr. Charles Gadive was working on a game-changer. The project was codenamed Hedgehog. Internally, the engineers called it something else. Gadive argued that the problem wasn't the power of the explosion, but the fact that they were trying to hit a target moving in 3 dimensions using a weapon that only moved in 1, straight down. The solution was radical. Instead of dropping bombs that sank to a fixed depth, they created projectiles that traveled forward, forming a circular pattern ahead of the ship and exploding only upon direct contact with the submarine's hull. If the projectile hit nothing, it would sink harmlessly to the ocean floor. This meant the ship's commander would know instantly if they had hit the target. It was either a violent explosion or total silence. To make 24 projectiles fall in a perfect 40-meter circle while a ship moved at 15 knots in heavy seas, engineers adapted old mortars from the First World War. When fired simultaneously, the projectiles left in a cone, each calibrated at a different angle. The result was a wall of steel falling over the submarine's estimated position. When the HMS Westcott received the first functional system in 1942, the crew hated it. It took up valuable space and frequently malfunctioned. Captain Walker, however, saw something others didn't. He realized the Hedgehog required completely new tactics. Conventional depth charges forced an attacking ship to pass directly over the submarine, losing sonar contact for several critical minutes. The Hedgehog could be fired while the ship still maintained sonar contact with the target. Walker spent 6 months developing the creeping attack. His ship would approach the U-boat at only 5 knots, maintaining constant sonar contact, and fire the Hedgehog at exactly 200 meters. There was no margin for error, but if executed perfectly, the submarine had nowhere to run. By November 1942, Walker was promoted to commander of the 2nd Escort Group, with 6 destroyers under his command, all equipped with the Hedgehog. He trained his crews obsessively, conducting simulated attacks until every sonar operator could identify a U-boat by sound alone. Walker would say they weren't hunting wolves, but men who made mistakes when they were afraid. On the night of May 9, 1943, British intelligence intercepted German transmissions indicating that a massive Wolfpack, codenamed Gruppe Donau, was positioning to attack convoy ONS-5. 8 veteran submarines were coordinated by Admiral Donitz himself from his headquarters in Paris. At 2:30 a.m. on May 10, the HMS Starling's sonar operator picked up the first contact. Walker ordered a slow approach. At 800 yards, he gave the order, "Fire Hedgehog." 24 projectiles arched over the dark waves. After 6 seconds of silence, a violent explosion ripped through the water, followed by another and another. It was 3 direct hits on the hull of the U-266. The submarine imploded at 100 meters. There was no time for emergency transmissions. 46 men died in less than 10 seconds. Walker told his flotilla to find the rest. Over the next 3 hours, they methodically hunted the remaining U-boats. The HMS Wren took out U-456, and the HMS Kite destroyed U-258 after a 40-minute chase. The U-753, commanded by a veteran ace, tried a sudden deep dive in total silence. Walker predicted the move perfectly, positioning his ships in a pincer formation. When the U-753 tried to slip away, the Starling was waiting. 3 massive explosions followed, and the hull of the U-753 snapped in two. By 6:15 a.m., 4 U-boats were gone. The remaining 4 realized something was terribly wrong. The U-221 sent a desperate message reporting direct hits despite evasive maneuvers and asked to abort. Donitz denied the request, demanding to know what kind of weapon the enemy was using. There would be no more reports. The U-221 was destroyed 20 minutes later. Erich Topp, one of the greatest German aces, tried a radical tactic in the U-552, surfacing to flee at full speed. Walker didn't waste a Hedgehog, he ordered conventional artillery. The U-552 was riddled with shells and sank in flames. By 9:30 a.m., the HMS Starling detected the last 2 submarines, U-641 and U-954. Walker ordered a coordinated strike. The sea erupted in 2 massive columns of water and debris. In less than 7 hours, 8 veteran U-boats had been eliminated. 320 men were dead. There were 0 survivors and 0 emergency transmissions. Convoy ONS-5 did not lose a single ship. When the German High Command realized the entire Gruppe Donau had vanished, they were in disbelief. It wasn't until July 1943, when fragments of hedgehog shells were recovered by French fishermen, that the Germans understood the truth. A Kriegsmarine report called the system extremely lethal and noted that countermeasures were unknown. It was too late. Between May 1943 and the end of the war, the Hedgehog was responsible for sinking 47 U-boats, with a success rate nearly 4 times higher than conventional depth charges. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned. Captain Walker became the most successful submarine hunter in history, personally sinking 20 U-boats. He died in July 1944 of exhaustion at only 48 years old. At his funeral, Allied submarines surfaced in formation in Liverpool Harbor to pay their respects. The baby Walker had introduced to the wolves had changed the war at sea forever. The 8 U-boats that disappeared without a cry were just the beginning of a new type of submarine warfare, where technology finally caught up to the courage of the men who used it.